blotted out of the face of this earth? Or is there anything more to it? You see, so this is the fundamental problem. That is why in religion, in philosophy, in spirituality, in psychology, over and over again, in different forms, this fundamental issue confronts us. And we try to understand it and discuss it and come to terms with it from different angles. So I'm going to discuss briefly a few things about this basic issue of life. This question of the possibility of life beyond death. Is there any life beyond death? If so, what it is? First of all, I would like to tell you a story from the Puranas. You know, in the Vedas, in the Upanishads and the Puranas, there are all kinds of very interesting stories which describe man's different ways of approaching this problem, handling this problem. So I would like to tell a story from the Puranas, that is the story of a great, powerful king. The name of the king of very ancient times is Hiranyakashipu. You know, most of these Indian names are connotative. They have some meaning. So this is very interesting. The name of this great king is Hiranyakashipu. Hiranya means gold. Kashipu has two meanings. What? It means soft bed. Very interesting. Then it means power. Well connected. So it's under, he lives luxurious life. You see? A great king that he is, he lives luxurious life. Soft bed is the symbol. Soft, comfortable bed, fancy bed is the symbol of that. So from there, derivatively, it means two things. It means sex and it means power. See? So Hiranyakashipu, therefore, is a man of great wealth, Hiranya gold, man of power, and man who is given to the delights of love. So that is Hiranyakashipu. Now he had been living this wonderful life of luxury, enjoying all the pleasures of life, all the pleasures that money can buy. Once in a while, the idea of death comes into his mind. He sees around, people die. So therefore, naturally the question arises, how long is he going to enjoy this life? Is it not terrible that one day all this pleasure seeking is going to come to an end? So you would be disturbed, very much disturbed. But then, as wealthy people always tend to think, he first of all thought that with this vast wealth that he has, he is going to buy immortality. He is going to bribe some god who has the secret of immortality in his hand and buy it. Omnipotence of the dollar principle. So this principle, omnipotence of the dollar, has been always there in some form or other. So he thought that the money that I have must be omnipotent, and I am going to find out the god who has the secret of immortality in his hand. I am going to bribe him. So he tried. But then he found out, to his utter disappointment, that gods do not care too much for money. That is why they are gods. They don't care too much for money or wealth. So he was disappointed. Then he thought that, you see, he is the sovereign of a great kingdom with immense power at his disposal. So he thought that by this power he is going to dominate, you see, the kingdom of heaven and compel the right person, the right God, you see, to yield to him the secret of immortality. So he tried. You see, with his vast regiments of soldiers, once in a while he would attack the kingdom of heaven. He would even conquer it, oust the gods from there. You see. But still he would find that the spirit that the gods have is unyielding. They are prepared to go through suffering and defeat. They don't care. So he was kind of bewildered. What can I do with them? You see, they do not yield to money. they do not submit to power. So then he began to think differently. Then he thought, well, in order to propitiate the gods, especially the right God who can deliver, he is going to plunge into austerities, into sadhana, into austerity, practice of austerities, spiritual discipline. See, he thought that that's now the only thing left to him. And he plunged into prolonged practice of spiritual discipline and austerities, brahmacharya, tapasya as it is called. And when a person does that, however, whatever his motivation may be, this has a value. You see, this discipline, tapasya, is a great value. And God must, you see, respond to that. So as he was practicing for a long time these austerities, Brahma, the creator, appeared before him. He says, I am much pleased with your spirit of self-discipline. Ask me any boon you want. First of all, therefore, that deep longing came to his mind, longing for immortality. He says, well, I wish to obtain the secret of immortality. That is my boon. Brahma says, no, that's the one boon I cannot grant. Secret of immortality is never for mortals. So, any other thing you want. Then he thought that he will make a detour, bypass. And so one after another, he was asking all kinds of boon. He says, please grant me the boon that no man, no animal, no God can kill me. He says, Tathastu, be it so. It was granted. No man, no animal, no God can kill him. Then he says, please grant me this boon that nobody can kill me. He was taking all kinds of precautions, you see, making doubly sure that his immortality is assured. He says, well, grant me the boon that nobody can kill me on land, in water, in air. Nobody, in none of these places. He says, Tathastu, granted. Then he says, please grant me that no weapons, sword or atom bomb, can kill me. He says, Tathastu, granted. All these boons, were granted. He says, now I am absolutely sure. Here am I. He did not want me to give him immortality, but I have got it. Then Brahma disappeared. He was very happy. Now he went back into his usual lifestyle with great vigor and enthusiasm and absolutely with no fear in his mind. To such a point that now he was, further confirmed in his, what we may call, anti-God way of living, because he has actually become a God himself. So he was confirmed in his anti-God way of living, what is called in Sanskrit Asuric way. Asura is anti-God. See, the Asuric way of living. Not caring a fig for the higher values of life, like truth and love and beauty and peace. So that's all. And then, this is very interesting, his own son, however, I'm cutting short this story. His own son, a lovely son, as he grew up, became very fond of Krishna, God of love. You see, Krishna. So the son was sent to the teacher's place according to ancient custom, and the teacher was trying to get him acquainted with alphabet. You see, the first letter the first consonant of the Indian alphabet is Ka. K. Now this is very interesting. The child, as soon as he was introduced to this first consonant K, he says, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. He immediately, it triggered something within him. And he started just taking the name of Krishna, 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 Krishna. And the teacher could not make any further progress with him. Just K was enough for the child. And so his whole, life was so full of this love of God, Krishna, that the teacher had to report this, and Krishna happened to be sworn enemy of the king, of his father. He could not bear the name of Krishna, because he is the demon king. He is the materialistic king. So he could not bear the name, and he thought, well, why should he not be superior to Krishna? He is immortal now. So therefore now began the struggle between the father and the son. He wanted to subdue his own son and to impose, his name is Hiranyakashipu, the Hiranya ideal upon him, and disabuse his mind of all idea of Krishna. So that was a terrible struggle. It went on, and how in all kinds of different ways the father tried to bend the spirit of his son, but he failed. One time, after all the tricks that the father played, then he wanted to he came to a final showdown, with gentle argument. And he says, why are you not giving up this name of Krishna? Don't you see how powerful, how wealthy I am? How I have a vast kingdom and everybody obeys me? Don't you see that? My law, my word prevails in the whole world. So why are you not giving up the name of Krishna? He says, yes, I know you have great power, but Krishna's power is still greater. And he is everywhere. If you have this kingdom here, Krishna's law prevails in the entire universe. So that's how the son was replying. The father became furious. He says, there was this palace here and the big pillars. He says, is there your Krishna in the pillar? Yes, Krishna is there in the pillar. Father became mad. And he gave a big kick at the pillar, almost to the point of cracking. And as he did that, suddenly, out of the interior of the pillar, a very terrible creature came. And this is called Narasingha, man-lion. Narasingha, huge size, man-lion came. And this man-lion, as he came out of the pillar, grabbed the king, placed him upon his thigh, and killed him with his sharp nails. And that was the end of it. Killed him with his sharp nails. So he died. How come? Did he not have all the boons from Brahma? God has a way of bypassing all these things. Because he was killed not by a man, not by God, but by a man-lion. So, neither man, nor animal, nor God. A man-lion killed him. Neither on land, nor in water, nor in air. He was killed neither on land, nor in air, nor in water. He was killed on the thigh of this, man-lion. So it avoids all those things. And that's how he was killed. You know the point? So then that became the starting point of a wonderful discussion regarding what true immortality is and how really man can obtain this immortality. So in order to tell you a little about the further discussion, I should like to tell you another little story. This is from Upanishad. And, Upanishad has so many different ways of developing this theme of the immortality, imperishable nature of the spirit in man. This is the story of a great sage, a different type of story. The story of a great sage whose name is Yajnavalkya, who is the central figure in many of the ancient scriptures. Profoundly learned, vast erudition, and lived a very full, abundant life, going through all the different phases of experience of life. He had two wives. One is Maitreyi, another is Kaikeyi. Very interesting to note that each wife had her own characteristics. These are two types. The two wives represent two types. One, Kaitayani, was very fond of property, possessions, enjoying life. That was one type. Maitreyi was a different type. She was very fond of learning. She had a lot of spiritual quest in her mind. She wanted to be more a colleague, a partner of her husband in his spiritual pursuit. Now one day, Yajnavalkya was sitting in his study, and he was just looked at his body, and he felt and he said, "Oh, this body has grown so old now." He looked back and he said, "I have lived such a long time. I remember all these past stages gone by. Long life now." So he said, "It is time for me to retire." You see, there is a saying in the Upanishad, Pancha Shordhang Vanam Brajet. When a man in the course of his life advancement comes to the wrong side of 50, Pancha Shordhang, wrong side of 50, it is time for him to pay attention to the call of the infinite. See? So he says that I have long passed that age-old time limit. So it is certainly time for me to attain to the call of the infinite. So he called both his wives to his side. And he said, "Well, I am now going to retire. There are seats here. Why not you can come in front." Now, Yajnavalkya, the great sage, having called both his wives to his side, he said, "Now it is time for me to retire and to go into contemplative search for the supreme truth. But before that, I wish to divide all my property equally between two of you." So, he wanted to divide his property and everything that he had between his two wives. So Kaitayani said what she wanted, what are the things she would specially like to have. Maitreyi, however, suddenly brought up a very strange question. She asked her husband, "Now tell me, having got all this wealth, and you have certainly a lot of that, is that going to help me to go beyond sorrow and death and to attain immortality?" He said, "No, my dear Maitreyi, it will be of no avail to that end. You will be able to enjoy life with this property that I have, but you cannot certainly go beyond the veil of tears and death." Then she says, "If it cannot help me cross the river of death, then what good is it? That is the one ambition of my life, to attain immortality. And if wealth, property cannot help me, I don't want it. And I know that you have the secret of immortality. So I would like to be your partner in that quest. And please give me a little bit of that." And the husband was delighted that now he has got his wife as a student. I mean, as a serious spiritual seeker. He was just overwhelmed with joy. And that is where the teaching of this Upanishad begins. Now he was teaching. He was pouring out his whole heart in discussing these fundamental issues of God and the Absolute and immortality and the secret beyond life and death, so on and so forth. You see, he went to discuss it. So now I am going to tell you a little bit of what he taught. Because this is a vast subject, I cannot possibly touch upon everything, but just a little bit of what he taught, I shall tell. And I should like to give you the gist of his teaching in a brief way, posing certain questions like this. Let us try to find out from his teaching what happens to a man who has, say, lived a very virtuous life. What happens to a person who has lived on the whole a life of crime and sin? What happens to a man who has been enlightened, attained enlightenment? And what happens to a child when he dies premature death, when he has not yet any chance of either virtue or sin or anything? A child. So in that way, in briefly answering these questions, I think I shall be able to tell you a little bit of the gist of the teaching of this great sage of ancient times, Yajna Valkha. What happens to a person who on the whole has lived a very virtuous life, whose virtue overbalances his vices? You see, the life after death, as he points out, is determined by our karma, the kind of actions that we perform, the kind of motivations that we have in determining our actions, the kind of thought which is predominant in the mind, especially at the time of death. As soon as you see people sometimes come across the statement in the ancient scriptures that the hereafter, life after death, is determined by the predominant thought at the time of death, some people think, well, in that case, no matter what I do during my life, I can just take it easy and enjoy, but making sure that at the time of death I shall take the name of Krishna, I shall take the name of God. then that is wonderful. That is going to determine my future life. So there are some stories also, discussing that. But unfortunately, what happens is that at the time of death, you see, it is no longer a matter of our sweet will, what we are going to think. The uppermost thought in the mind is determined by what we have done, what we have thought, how we have lived the whole life. You see, it is the resultant. It is the resultant of the sum total of our thoughts, actions, motivations throughout the entire life. That determines what idea, what desire is going to come uppermost in the mind at the supreme moment. It is no longer on your sweet will. All right. But the point is, the whole point therefore is that the future is inexorably determined by the karma of the past. Karma of our whole life determines that. So now let me again bring up this question. What happens to a person in whose life virtuous karma preponderates over sinful actions? Now, in answering all these, I want all of you to bear one point in mind, a very basic point. That is this. In Indian philosophy, it has been very much emphasized that the soul of man, every individual soul, is in a process of evolution. It is evolving and evolving. And ultimate goal of this evolution of every human soul, good or bad, virtuous or sinful, of every human soul, is to be blissfully united with the infinite. Because every human soul sprang from the infinite and ultimately is destined to be united with the infinite, because every human soul is a child of the infinite. If the soul per se, the spirit in man, is really a child of infinite, which is absolute love, naturally its ultimate destiny will be to be reunited with the infinite from which it came. Because God as love cannot eternally condemn any child, to eternal torture. That is just absurd. That is incompatible with the very concept of God as infinite love. Love means mercy, forgiveness, So this is unthinkable. So this is one point then, that every human soul is in a process of evolution and ultimately destined to be united or reunited with the divine from which it sprang into existence. Some reaching there sooner, some may be reaching there later, but everyone is destined. This is what we may call, what I have called in my book, the democratic theory of immortality. You see, not aristocratic theory, not conditional theory, not that some on the fulfillment of a certain conditions will attain and others will not, but democratic theory. All right. Now, a person who has been on the whole virtuous, therefore, you see, after death, by reason of his virtuous actions, good karma, he goes to a high and exalted level of consciousness, which may be called heaven. He goes to an exalted level of consciousness, stays there, participates in the delightful life of the higher level of consciousness. But as he does so, gradually the accumulated his capital of virtue, capital of good karma wears out. He is spending that capital. You see the point? He is spending his karma capital by living a very delightful life in heaven. So the time therefore comes when the capital is exhausted. And as soon as that happens, then he comes back again, he is reborn to carry on evolution further. See, toward the ultimate goal. Ultimate goal therefore is not heaven. Ultimate goal is immortality, which is beyond earth and heaven. Because heaven also is a plane of existence in time, and therefore it must come to an end. You see, because it is a plane of existence in time. Immortality, in the true sense of the word, is a mode of existence beyond time. This is a very important distinction. True immortality is a mode of existence beyond time, in blissful union with the infinite, which is beyond time, which is eternal. So that is true immortality. What happens now to an individual who has lived on the whole a life of sinfulness, whose good actions are very few, if any, very few, but bad actions preponderate? What happens to them? Just the opposite. You see, he would therefore, after death, would live for a long time in a realm of darkness, tortured in the mind with doubt, uncertainty, despair, disappointment, frustration, so on and so forth. You see, but that also will come to an end as soon as the capital of bad karma is exhausted. You see, through the suffering, this capital, this bad karma is burned. You see, as a man suffers, his bad karma is burned. You see, so after the whole bad karma is burned, then he again comes back. You see, he is reincarnated and carries on evolution further toward the attainment of the ultimate destiny, which is beyond time, which is this blissful union with the eternal. What happens to an individual, to a child, for example? A child who is not yet good nor bad, who has not yet been, who has not yet been quite even acquainted with the good and bad of the world, who has innocence, but dies. What happens to him? Now, a very interesting point I shall tell you here, that some time ago, a few years ago, the American Society for Psychical Research carried on quite an extensive research project to investigate the cases of life after death and reincarnation. And Professor Ian Stevenson received a grant from this American Society for Psychical Research to do this project, and he went to different parts of the world with some of his assistants to make a scientific investigation of all known cases, reported cases. So he went to different parts of the world, to some Latin American countries, to Africa, to some European countries, to Ceylon, to India, to Burma, and investigated scientifically some of the cases of reincarnation. The findings of his research were published in book form. 20 cases of reincarnation, that is the name of the book. 20 cases of reincarnation by Dr. Ian Stevenson. You see, recording with very extensive documentation the findings of its investigation in this field of reincarnation and rebirth. So he has dealt there with some of these cases, those who died in childhood. And the substance of his findings is that in such cases, when an individual dies in childhood, then the gap between death and rebirth is very small, very brief. So that therefore he does not go to live in an exalted plane for long, not to a realm of darkness for long. The transition period is very brief, say from 1 year to 2-3 years, or even less, you see, and then gets reborn again and carries on evolution. So those of you who are interested may read this book. There are many such cases he has reported, and that's the period. Perhaps none of the cases he has reported of childhood death would go beyond 10 years, but usually 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, like that. And the interesting point also here, the cases that have been reported, the interesting point is that you see, as the dead child gets reborn, and at the age of 2, 3, suddenly a little incident revives the memory. You see, he suddenly remembers where he was born. For example, in the case of one child, he reports that when an incident happened when he was only 3 years or 4 years old, then he looked at his mother and he said, "You are not my mother." And he said, he mentioned the name, that my mother is so-and-so who lives in another place about 100 miles apart, 100 miles distant. He says, so suddenly the memory came to this child's mind, and he said, "You are not my mother lives over there." And then he began to name some other names. He told the name of the village, you see, and they were all shocked. And from that moment on, as his memory came, he began to behave in a very strange way. He was urging them to take him to that village. And he would, they did not pay any attention. They thought, well, something has happened to him. They did not believe him. So he would run away. Frequently he would run away in an attempt to go to that place. You see, later on, of course, they did, and this is a long story. But there are many very interesting cases. And how, you see, many of these were verified. All the things that he said about that were verified later. All right. So this is what happens. Now, what happens to a person who has attained liberation, enlightenment in this life? First of all, you see, when a person attains liberation or enlightenment in this very life, according to Indian philosophy, that very moment, when you attain enlightenment, liberation in the true sense of the word, you become immortal. You partake of the life eternal of the Supreme Spirit. This is the expression the great the Western philosopher Spinoza has used, life eternal. And he had the same view, that if an individual attains supreme wisdom, then right then and there, he partakes of the life eternal of God, because he becomes united with God. And that really is the essence of immortality. When as a result of your conquest of ignorance, dispelling the darkness of ignorance, and attaining the light of truth, the supreme light of truth, you attain enlightenment, then as a result of this enlightenment, you participate in the eternal life of the Supreme Being, because you realize now that you are an integral part of the Absolute Spirit, of the Supreme Spirit. You have a feeling of oneness with the Supreme Spirit. And the Supreme Spirit is eternal, immortal. So you feel you are immortal, because you are one with it. All right. So now the further question will arise, that after his death, what happens? You know, when a person gains immortality in the true sense of the word, then it means full freedom. Enlightenment, immortality, also implies full freedom of the spirit. And I mean freedom. So that means, therefore, that on the attainment of full freedom, an individual, the liberated person, has different options before him, which he can freely choose. One thing for sure, having attained freedom, he is no longer under the compulsion of the law of karma. No longer under the necessity or compulsion of the law of karma. With regard to him, you cannot say, it cannot be said, well, after a certain period of staying in some other plane of consciousness, dark or bright, he will again come back according to the law of karma. No, because he has been liberated from the law of karma. No more compulsion in his life, no more necessity in his life. That for sure. All right. Then what? As I say, he can make a free choice with regard to certain options which are present to him. He may freely choose, for example, first of all, to prolong this very life as long as it is necessary to fulfill the will of God. That is one possibility. Otherwise he would have died, say, earlier. But now, having attained this immortality, having gained divine power, he also attains what is called Ichamrittu, ability to die at will, Ichamrittu. So he can prolong his life, not selfishly, not for any selfish reason, no. He can prolong his life if he thinks that it is necessary to live longer for the fulfillment of the divine purpose of his life. So that is longevity, the prolonging life, in implicit obedience to the divine will, out of his awareness of the divine purpose. Then, having left the body, he has some choice to make also, some options he can make. He can choose to dwell on some higher plane of consciousness and help humanity, help human beings, guiding them toward the divine realization. So that is another option he can choose. Continuing to dwell on some higher plane of consciousness in an endeavor to help fellow beings on their spiritual path. Still another option is he may freely choose to be absorbed, to be united in the universal substance of God. This is called loyal. You see, he can do that too. This freedom, free option of becoming absorbed in the universal substance of the divine. Still another option is, you see, he is no longer under the necessity of coming back to this world and taking another body. No more compulsion, because he has been emancipated from the shackles of karma. But he may freely choose to come back to this world and take another body for the good of humanity, for the glory of God, for the fulfillment of the divine purpose in this world. He can do that. That is really what we call an avatar. He is the man-God. When a person, liberated person, freely chooses to come back and take another body toward the fulfillment of the divine purpose and manifestation of the divine glory in life and society, that is the Messiah. That kind of person, a liberated person, is a Messiah. He is what we call avatar, A-V-A-T-A-R, avatar. A man-God in the true sense of the word. So what I'm trying to bring out then is that when a person attains enlightenment, he gains immortality in the true sense of the word. And immortality in its essence is not just existing for a longer time on this plane or in some other plane. Immortality in the highest sense of the word is blissful union with the divine, who is eternal, who is altogether beyond time. And when a liberated person attains this immortality, he has full freedom. You see, he can make a free choice with regard to the different alternatives which are open to him. But each one of the alternatives, however, as I have just now tell you, each one of the alternatives aims at the service of God, total dedication to the fulfillment of the divine purpose